Hey, g'day, it's Brezza. Thanks for stopping by. Now this is part 2 of making a pair of mid-century modern inspired lamps. Now if you missed the first episode, there's a link up above there now. There's also one in the description. And what we're going to do today is do all of the finishing processes on these lamps. So I want to do all of the varnish work on the wood. I also need to make a decorative cover for this piece of threaded tube here, just to make it look a bit more interesting. And that's going to be a bit of metal machining and fabrication and some electroplating. And I also want you to see how the lampshades were made. Now I didn't make those, my wife did those, she's the expert. So I want you to see the process that went on to make those. So I think we're going to do the wood finishing first, so I'm going to head outside with the spray gun and get all of that done. These are the two products that I'll be using for finishing these lamps. This is a single pack nitrocellulose sanding sealer, and I've got a 95% gloss top coat. Now these nitrocellulose lacquers are very quick drying. They're usually tack free in about 10 minutes, which is good because you don't have as big a problem with dust settling on the surface when the finish dries. This can be sanded back after about an hour or two, depending on the temperature of the day. And it's just a regular lacquer, but it's got a filler powder in it. And the filler helps to level the grain, and it also makes it easier to sand back later. It doesn't tend to clog the sandpaper as badly. Now you do need to wear a good quality respirator when you're working with this stuff, and you do need to spray it. It's difficult to put on with a brush because it does dry so quickly. So I'll be doing this outside with a respirator, with a spray gun, and just for your information, this stuff is getting very hard to buy now. Wattle are no longer producing that product, and the other company that used to make it is Mirrortone. They're no longer making paint either. I rang Wattle and asked them why they weren't making it, and they just simply told me that they were having trouble getting raw materials. So yeah, don't know what we're going to do going forward. This is the preferred finish by guitar makers, so I don't know what they're going to do, but just for now I've got enough to do this job. Just going to put some thinner in that as well. That's been sitting now for about an hour and a half. It's quite dry to touch, and what we can do now is prepare this with a second coat of sanding sealer. Now when you run your hand over this, it feels quite rough, and what has happened is the wood fibres that were cut by the abrasive paper when we did the final sanding, those wood fibres will absorb the solvent and the varnish that we use, or the lacquer, and they tend to swell. So each of those little wood fibres wants to stand up above the surface of the wood, and we need to cut those surfaces back, or cut the tops off those little wood fibres. So that process is called de-nibbing, and it gives you a much smoother finish for the second coat. Now what I use is usually a piece of worn out sandpaper. So this is some 180 grit, yeah, 180, but it's quite worn, and it's just a matter of folding it over in half and using it on the tips of your fingers and sand that back. And you can see the powder that comes off from this sanding sealer, and it doesn't clog up the paper as readily as some other finishes. So don't use the sanding block, just use it on the pads of your fingers, and that way you won't cut through the sharp edges anywhere. And after you've done that, you can use a red Scotch-Brite pad and just use that to soften the whole surface up before the next coat. So that now has got a very slight sheen to it. It feels nice and silky smooth, ready for that next coat. This one has been done, so it looks quite dull, but that's intentional. And when we get the next coat on now, that's going to build up that surface and give us a much smoother finish. So I'll get this one done and then we'll get a second coat on. I didn't mention this before, but when you're doing any sanding between coats with a finish like this, you absolutely must sand with the grain. If you go round circles, or if you go across the grain, you'll put scratch marks in the wood fibres themselves, and they'll absorb the finish differently to the areas that you've done sanding with the grain, and you'll see all of those scratch marks when you're done. So although it's tedious, you've got to absolutely stick with that grain direction. If you do that, you'll be fine. So an area like this is where it's really tempting to just sand around the surface of the curve there, but you've got to resist the temptation to do that and just keep working with the grain, even though it's very short strokes, but it can be done. Yeah, whatever you do, don't go sideways. Alright, that one's pretty much done. What you're looking for is any areas where it looks shiny. So there's a bit just in here, and you just got to go over that area. If it's shiny, it means you haven't touched it with the sandpaper. It's always those little corners that are difficult to do. Alright, the last thing you want to do is get a clean, dry cloth. Just wipe off as much of that dust as you can. We're also going to hit this with some compressed air just before we put the next coat on. Now you can actually buy a thing called a tack cloth. If you go to your paint retailer, they should sell them. It's sort of just like a sticky cloth, and it picks up any of those little dust particles and keeps them off the surface. But yeah, clean dry rag followed with some compressed air should do the job. Forgot that bit. Typical, I forgot to turn the camera on when I did that second coat. But what I did was I just pulled that trigger part way, and you'll only get air coming out of the gun, and you can use that to dust down the surface of the part. And then you want to give that just a light coat. So no more than that. It should look like a dull sheen on the surface there, and we let that coat go off. So we'll leave it for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, then come back and give it a heavier coat. And what happens is the first coat goes sticky, the second coat will hang off the first one. If you do one heavy coat, it'll almost certainly get a run in the surface, which is really hard to get rid of later. So after that sort of lost that wet look, you can come back and give it a slightly heavier coat. You can see the gloss on that surface now, but that's going to go dull as this coat dries. And then I'll probably give this one more coat, cut it back again, sand it back again, and then we can do the top coat. Let these dry overnight, and they sort of feel dry and warm to the touch now. If it feels cold, it means that the solvent's still evaporating out of the finish, and you should leave it a bit longer. Now, when I get this prepped for the top coat, I find that these are the best thing in the world for doing this. This is called a SIA sponge, S-I-A. This one's an ultra fine. They're really tough, but they've got this soft, spongy backing on them as well. And they cut quite freely. And it's ideal on this sort of a job where it's got curves and undercuts and all that sort of stuff. So you can get right in against corners using the sharp edge on the sponge, and of course you can wrap it around the rounds. And what you're looking for is just a smooth, uniform finish. You've got to be really careful to pay attention to edges and corners. It's quite easy to overlook them. And you can see that fine dust coming off there. So I'll get all of this one done. This one's already been done, and when you look along the surface and get the light reflecting off it, it should have a sort of a dull sheen. And I've gone over that with a red Scotch-Brite as well, just giving it a final buff with that, and then clean that with that dry cloth. So I'll get these ready and then we'll do the top coat. This will give you a bit of a comparison between this 95% gloss top coat in here and this sanding sealer. So the glossy top coats are a clear, slightly honey colour. This is more of a creamy colour, and that's because it's got the powder in it. And I would normally prefer to use like about a 50% gloss on a wood product like I'm doing today. The reason for that is that these really glossy top coats will show up the open grain structure of the wood and also any defects. So if there's dents or scratches or marks, it'll show it up really clearly. I will use this because that's all I could get, and I prepped these parts fairly well, so I think it'll be okay. The big problem today is that it's awful weather for doing this. It's windy and a bit overcast, and it's been spots of rain. So I'll have to do this sort of slightly indoor on the roller door side of the workshop, but that, I'll open the door and let the fumes out. This is already fairly thin, but I'll put a bit more in there. After you've given that a bit of a shake to mix the thinners through the paint, you should always spray a bit through, because there will be a bit of thick paint between the neck of the cup and the tip of the gun. So just get rid of that, and then you get the thin product through after that. Hate wearing those things, but it is necessary. Now, I think that went fairly well. I did a light coat to start with. I let that set for about 3 to 4 minutes, then went back over that with 2 fairly wet coats. So the best thing to do now is just leave it alone. I'll come back in about 10 to 15 minutes. It should be almost touch dry, and then we'll check it all over. That's been about an hour and a half now, and that's safe to touch, although it's not fully cured yet. And when I was looking at this, I noticed there's a very slight white blush on the surface of that glossy finish there. Now that's a result of doing this on the wrong day. So it's quite cold and humid today, and what happens is the moisture in the air condenses out on the surface of the evaporating solvent, and it leaves that white blush there. Good thing is it will come off. What you need to do is just sort of rub that back, and I'll use a very fine grey Scotch-Brite, and then I'll use some of this Canuba wax. And that will remove that white blush, but it also dulls down that super glossy finish, which I don't really like anyway. So I'll do that, and I'll show you what it looks like toward the end of the project. But what I need to do now is to cover up this threaded tube here. Now I want 60 millimeters of extension between the top of the lamp and the bottom of the lamp holder, and that threaded tube there looks untidy, so we're going to make a decorative cover to go over that. So we're going to fabricate that from brass. So I've got some 2 millimeter thick brass sheet, and I've got this 1/2 inch bore brass tube, and we're going to fabricate something which will cover that up, and it's also going to look really sexy. So this is the part that I want to make here. It will be 60 millimeters long, it'll be 25 millimeters OD, and that bore in the tube will fit over the threaded tube on the lamp holder. Now you could machine that from solid brass, but it seems a bit extravagant. So what I'm going to do is to fabricate it from this brass sheet and the tube. So it's going to consist of a series of brass washers and some short segments of tube. They will have a step on the end of them, and the washers will simply fit over that, and I can stack those elements one on top of the other, and then will all be soft soldered and then electroplated. So I'm going to begin by cutting out some squares from this brass sheet, and they will be drilled and then pressure turned to give me the OD. This disc here only has the corner round on one edge, and this will be the very bottom disc on the stack. I'll do the rest of these off camera, but these will all need a bit of a polish, and then we'll soft solder this together. They're the 4 pieces of tube I need to make one of these assemblies. So these need to be cleaned up on the ends and have a step turned in one end or both, and then we can do the assembly. That little step that I just turned there will fit inside the bore of that brass disc, and that will get soft soldered in there later on. So I need to do both ends of the short ones. This one here just needs to be chamfered on top, and then we'll soft solder everything together. I've got all of those ring and disc elements assembled now, so they're on a piece of 10mm all thread with a nut on either end. That keeps everything tightly aligned. And what I'll do now is put some zinc chloride flux on each joint and put a little scrap of solder in each corner and just heat that, and that will form the joint between all of the parts. Now here's one I did earlier, and I think I had 3 goes at this one. I tried just stacking the pieces one on top of the other and assembling them that way, but it just kept falling apart. Then I put it on a piece of 8mm all thread, but it didn't stay straight, so I think this is the better way. These are just a very small piece of resin cord solder for electrical work. Okay, I'll go and wash this now and then it can go over the lathe and we'll polish it. Well, that's as polished as I want that to be. What I'll do now is clean this and then it goes into a nickel plating bath. Now I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the process because I've done that on previous videos. In fact, I'll put a link to a video up above there now where I go into a lot more detail about electroplating brass. But basically we're just going to clean it, it goes into the electroplating bath, and then we can get this part assembled. Shiny. Now, the most important thing when you're doing any sort of electroplating is to make sure that your parts are absolutely clean. I put the parts in a plastic bag in an ultrasonic cleaner, and they're sitting in a product called Simple Green. It's a household cleaner. It's based on a citrus product, and they're left in the ultrasonic cleaner for 10 minutes. Then they come out and they're rinsed under lots and lots of clean running water. Now, it's also a good idea to start with a test piece. So I've got a small piece of tube in there that's been polished, and that will get plated out first, and that way if there are any impurities on the nickel anodes, it will deposit onto that test piece and not onto your finished parts. Now when the parts are rinsed and wired up, they go into the plating bath. I've got the bath heated up to about 55 degrees centigrade, and that's really important. Nickel plating doesn't really like happening at low temperatures, so 20 degrees you may find that you don't get any plating, or it's very, very slow. Now I left the parts in there for around about 25 minutes. I was running them at 5 volts and about 2.5 amps. Then it can come out, and once again it gets rinsed quite well under lots of cold running water, and then the parts are basically finished and ready to go into service. I just want to give you a close-up look at the process my wife used to make these beautiful lampshades. Now, very early on in the project we realised that getting the correct style and colour and type of fabric was really important, and we had previously found a website called spoonflower.com. Now I'll put links in the description for both the companies that we used for this project. Now on the website spoonflower.com you can search for any style of fabric, any type of fabric, and they also sell things like finished cushion covers and bed covers and so on, and wallpaper, and that will be important later. There's also a search box, so if you're looking for a particular style, say for example Art Deco, you can search for that style and then look at the results and just order the size of fabric that you want. Now when we started looking at the mid-century modern style fabrics, we realised that there were literally hundreds and hundreds of them, and you can often buy the same pattern but in a different colour set. Now we think that what they actually do is they inkjet print onto plain fabric to order. Now once we had the fabric, we needed a kit for making up the lampshade itself, and that came from a company called Ministry of Handmade. Now that's an Australian company. And by the way, neither of these companies sponsored us. We paid full price for everything that you see here. And in the kit for the lampshade you will get the double-sided tapes, the double-sided film, the PVC tube that goes around the inside of the lampshade, and also the wire hoops that go top and bottom. There's also a very good set of detailed instructions. And the process of making these is just about cutting your fabric to size, making sure you get the correct tapes and the correct films in place, and make sure you get good bonding between the fabric and the film. And then it's just a case of rolling it up on the wire hoops. You do have to be a bit careful to get a neat finish top and bottom and around the seam. But I think they turned out fantastic, and it's just absolutely perfect for this particular project. And I must say my wife is a lot more methodical at doing this sort of thing than I am, and like I say, I think the end result speaks for itself. Okay, end result, and I think these nickel plated brass parts look great. So it just adds a bit of bling to the finished lamp, but it's also there to cover up that rather ordinary looking threaded tube that was on the base of the lamp holder. Now I've also just buffed off the surface of that lacquer with that fine grey Scotch-Brite and put some wax on that, and that just sort of dulls down that really super bright shiny finish, and it just feels lovely. So I've also put some cork on the bottom of the legs there, and for strain relief I've hot glued the wire into the base of the leg and put the cork over the top. So it doesn't matter how much you yank on that, you're not going to put any strain on the wiring inside the lamp holder itself. Now they do work, but I need to get a better bulb than that. That's one of those cool white bulbs which I hate. I think they need a nice warm bulb to look right. However, let's go and get these upstairs now. I'll put the lampshades on and we'll have a look at them in their natural habitat. Well, there's the lamps in their finished position. Now I did manage to get a pair of warm white LED bulbs. I think they're 5 watt bulbs. And in the bedside tables there's a double power point with USB ports underneath the drawer, right in the back of the space under the drawer. And the bed head itself is made from the same material as the lamp, so it's all Tasmanian blackwood, and that was probably the biggest piece of furniture I've ever had to build in my workshop. It really did take up a lot of room, but I think it looks great, and I loved a little bit of nickel plating on the covers over those threaded tubes under the lamp holders. I just think it's a nice little detail. Now this is a guest bedroom, and we want the whole room to have the same theme, that is mid-century modern. And over in this corner here there are a pair of chairs. Now these are not mid-century modern, these are more Edwardian style. But that space in between the chairs looks a bit clumsy, so we want to fill that with a type of table called a guitar pick table. Now these were quite common during the mid-century period. Normally they had an asymmetric triangular shaped top. It had a set of steel hairpin legs supporting it, and the top would normally have a retro style laminate on top of that. Here in Australia we used to call it Laminex, but it turns out that those retro pattern Laminex or laminate sheets are very hard to get now, but you can buy a wallpaper with exactly the same pattern as what we've used on the lampshades. So I've ordered that, and I can make a sort of a replica laminate from that wallpaper. That will be a build video coming up on this channel soon. And sitting on top of the table I want to have a lava lamp. Also quite common from that mid-century period. But the ones you can buy now are a bit ordinary, they look cheap, and I want to make a more retro style. Now it's going to be a metal casting project, so that's also coming up on this channel, so stay tuned for that. But for now I'm going to leave you with one last look at these beautiful lamps and just say thank you for watching today, and I'll check you on the next video. Prezzo signing out. Cheers.